Ms. Self.
Chair Stone and Assemblymember Chesbro, thank you very much for the opportunity to address this Select Committee on Coastal Protection this morning. I will say I'm glad to hear that there's an interest in discussing possible impacts from inland oil spills and other kinds of spills. My comments are mostly coastally oriented, but I'll try to leave a little bit of time for inland. As a member of the OSPR Technical Advisory Committee, an active participant in the Area Committee, and a member of the Harbor Safety Committee, as well as the work groups on navigation and different special work groups that have come together around bunkering and lightering risks, that kind of thing. I've been pretty involved in evaluating gaps in OSPR's programs, including participating in the incident-specific preparedness review, along with Mr. Berg here, in which the group came up with, I believe it was 192 or so recommendations. Many of these have been implemented, although there's still a lot of room for improvement, certainly. Since the Casca-Busan oil spill in San Francisco Bay in 2007, I've seen a lot of substantial improvement in the state's readiness for oil spills, partly due to the 9+ bills that have been signed into law since then to require new protections, like risk-based monitoring of fuel transfers, involvement of local governments in oil spill planning, and the proactive capture and care of oiled wildlife. I would like to note here the importance of making sure that statutory mandates are based in on-the-water experience in the specific environments of California. We always run the risk of unintended consequences where some technology may work well in the calm waters of Puget Sound. It may not be appropriate for the Central Bay. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a thought of trying to pre-boom all fuel transfers in the Central Bay, where currents are frequently in excess of 4 knots, and you have immediate entrainment of boom and possibly even a higher risk of oil spill by using that approach. Similarly, with the new CARB standards and the requirements for the switch to cleaner fuels, lighter fuels coming into California waters, we have an increase in loss of propulsion in big ships and an increase in oil spill risk. Once oil is in the water, a quick response to corral and skim the oil from the surface is always the preferred response strategy, wherever the wave height is low enough and the currents are slow enough to allow recovery. I hope that creative companies will continue to develop better mechanical recovery techniques for floating oil in real sea state conditions. But it's nearly impossible to collect oil from the water surface once it's spilled, making prevention the most important protection we have for our coastlines. Keeping prevention activities like best maritime practices in navigation and fuel transfers, pipeline safety, offshore platform inspection, evaluation of loss of propulsion incidents, all of these prevention programs are essential and should continue to be improved. I believe that they should be improved and fully funded and thoughtfully implemented. I would like to make an unnecessary plug here for AB 881, which I think is critical to saving not just the Oil Wildlife Care Network, but the core programs for preparedness at OSPR, including actually testing the sensitive shoreline strategies. We used to have a shoreline protection strategy at Bolinas Lagoon, which included stringing boom across the mouth of that inlet. I believe somebody from the National Response Corporation almost died trying to implement that during Casca-Busan, and it's since been proven that that's a stupid strategy. Anyway, it's really important to have, boats on the water and boots on the ground. I will urge the consideration of a trailer bill to consider bumping 881 back up to 7.5 cents. I also want to say that additional attention and funding are also needed to anticipate and respond effectively to increased inland oil spills that I believe will result from increased fracking and well stimulation, as well as from increased rail and pipeline transport of fuel in California. Finally, consistent with the recommendation of the OSPR TAC in its recent biennial report to the legislature, I do want to emphasize the statutory conflict between the Fish and Game Code Section 704 and the Government Code 8670.40, I believe, wherein the administrator has not just the authority but the absolute mandatory responsibility for managing all spill assets and resources, including personnel, and yet Section 704 of Fish and Game Code allows the director to control all personnel. It's an absolute statutory conflict that needs to be resolved. While California has one of the best prepared oil spill programs in the nation, in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster opened the eyes of many people as to just how bad an oil spill could be. A lack of oil spill plans and maps, failed leadership on the part of the Coast Guard, a dysfunctional state politics made the response slow and painful to watch. But most alarming to me was the pumping of over 770,000 gallons of dispersant directly at a gushing underwater wellhead, which I believe was to keep the oil invisible to the public and to avoid financial liability for hidden natural resource damages. The coast, the economic value of the coast and the fisheries is well known. The amount of liability, financial liability that would have been incurred by that damage is clear. However, the marine mammals and the marine ecosystem was poorly understood and the economics poorly documented. Further, the damage to marine mammals and the fisheries beneath the surface really couldn't be tracked, and that money could never be applied to the natural resource damage assessment. I believe that was part of the plan. A disaster on this scale used to be inconceivable to California residents, but it's not impossible. Over 27 billion gallons of oil cross California state waters and pipelines every year. And with the increased use of fracking and acidization of wells in the Monterey Shale and the Los Angeles Basin, I believe we're going to see a large risk for marine oil spills resulting from increased pressure at wellheads offshore, as well as inland, where we're going to see high-pressure wells. It used to be said when I was first on the TAC, I always heard from state lands, we don't have to worry about offshore platforms because none of those reservoirs are under positive pressure. We have to suck the oil out. That won't be the case with fracking. BayKeeper, just for the record, supports an outright ban on well stimulation in the state. But until then, data collection and regulation are essential to understanding and reducing the threat of fracking. And I do want to make another plug here for SB 4, authored by Senator Pavley, currently on suspense and Assembly appropriations, because I think it's crucial for building data about where fracking is happening and other kinds of well stimulation, what chemicals are being used so that if good planning can be done, and to ensure that there's good coordination with OSPR. Right now, they're in the Dogger draft regulations. There is no mention of notification for spills, no contingency planning, and no response plans. Should we see a major oil spill like Deepwater Horizon here in California waters? I don't believe that injection of dispersant should ever be considered. The precautionary principle dictates that we err on the side of caution in protecting our marine mammals and our fish. Instead, OSPR should focus on prevention, planning, training, careful inventory of equipment and assets, knowledge of available trained personnel, including those from non-governmental organizations, sound sensitive site strategies, competent spill management teams who are drilled to ensure that there are local qualified individuals who are available to act as first responders. We don't have to wait for them to come in from Louisiana. Continued collaboration with local governments and NGOs, state-of-the-art booming and recovering technology, careful oversight of oil transport, and above all, frequent and clear communications and transparency with stakeholders and the public. Our coastlines deserve a world-class prevention and preparedness program. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
We've heard some conflicting testimony today about how clear the evidence is relative to the environmental impacts of the use of dispersants. What's your take on the state of the? I know you talked about the other consequences relative to potentially hiding impacts, but in terms of the overall relative comparison, what's your response to the research to date?
Well, I do think that it's conflicting, but I think that one of the main confounding factors is that it's very difficult to. We don't have a lot of baseline data on deep water ecosystems. We also, I think it's very hard to ascertain what the ecological impacts have been at that depth. During Deepwater Horizon, there were several research groups ready to take ships out into the Gulf to try to document the impacts of the migrating plume of mixed dispersants in oil, and those efforts were prevented, and that data was not collected. So I think we don't know a lot, and in my view, the precautionary principle dictates that we avoid any extra harm if possible. I was in a working group with the Farallon and Cordell Bank Sanctuary Association advisory group, I can't remember the name of it, where we were looking at the possible impacts from using dispersants out in the marine sanctuaries. The bird people were kind of in favor of dispersants because it would keep oil off of the intertidal rocky habitats where the shellfish, the fish eat, could be exposed. The fish people less fond of dispersants. So I think that it's right to characterize it as having to, sometimes balance the value of one species against another. But looking at the pretty massive die-off of dolphins in the Gulf of Mexico since the spill, it could just be the oil, but a lot of oil was sunk that would have stayed on the surface. And that unusual mortality event that continues to this day, I think, is at least some subjective evidence that it's not as safe as some scientists would have us think it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, I worry about those trade-offs necessarily, especially given the volume of potential oil. I mean, natural seepage or smaller events, but with the amount of oil that we're talking about in a potential event, and I'm just not sure that we know enough about what those impacts are in sending that oil down into the water column. I know there's been criticism of that approach in the Gulf, but that was a tremendous amount of oil in that ecosystem. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming in for your testimony.